All right, so back here, this is going to be part two of the air conditioning install on the Bell. I know the first one was just more fundamental stuff of kind of getting the car prepped for it. So on this one, there's actually an additional piece that I'm going to be doing for my specific project, which is I'm going to be pulling the intake manifold. There's actually a few things that I need to do personally to get it to seal a little bit better, and also I want to adjust my tri-power setup to get it to come in progressively in the way that I want it to. So we're going to focus a little bit on removing the intake today, and again, we just want you guys to be able to see what I'm doing to this specific car. If you're looking just for AC specific stuff, part 3 is going to get more into that, so by the time that's up, we'll actually add a link and jump over to that. But for now, if you're just interested in our build, follow along because you're going to see what I'm doing here. Alright, so at the end of the last video I mentioned this, but as you can see, I've removed the upper radiator hose after draining the coolant out. So I just basically pulled the lower radiator hose to do that properly, and it's fully drained now, and I pulled this off because obviously that does connect to the intake manifold here. I'm not planning on removing the thermostat or the housing here just yet. I want to kind of pull this as one assembly. So like I said, I've pulled this off. I've also pulled the cap off of the distributor. In my instance, I actually need to remove the cap to be able to get the distributor out. And actually, on the 59 with this specific distributor, I even have to pull the top piece off of here. This is an electronic ignition style, kind of self-contained distributor. So I actually have to pull this upper element off as well, which I've not done, but it's just 2 Phillips head screws right here. One important thing, I did actually mark my placement and rotation of the distributor using just a Sharpie. I have a line on the intake manifold itself and on the stem of the distributor, so that when I put this back together, I can come very close to the timing that I already had. That way, at least I know that it's going to fire, first thing when I do start the car back up. So that's all the stuff that we missed from the last video. But for now, we're going to jump into how to actually remove this Offenhauser tri-power manifold. Yep. All right, so we've gotten the normal bolts out of the intake manifold, but you may have noticed that we actually have these kind of unique bolts in the center on both sides here. So for those of you not as well versed in the different types of small blocks, the later style small blocks, which have these center bolt valve covers, so when you see your 4 bolts in the center rather than around the outside, they actually changed the angle of these bolts in the center on each side. And it's an interesting thing because basically it limits your selection of intake manifolds quite severely. So when I wanted to put the tri-power on this, they don't make a tri-power intake manifold for a late style small block. They're all for the early styles. Thankfully, I discovered the Y-end actually makes a kit that is designed to adapt supercharger intake manifolds to the late style blocks. And basically you're supposed to kind of slot the center bolt holes by cutting them open with a Dremel to allow you to shift the angle of those bolts. And then it provides these little wedge pieces that correct the geometry so that your pressure sits properly. And I'm going to show you one of these now so you can see what I'm talking about. So you see this little triangular wedge-shaped aluminum piece in here, right? And then you got your washer, and then you have your hex kind of cap nut style here. So this is what corrects the geometry between the actual manifold and the bolt itself. So you notice that mine is not slotted, and that's actually why you're seeing a lot of this oil here. I had misread the instructions when I first installed the manifold, and I thought that it was just opening up the holes when actually it said to cut them the whole way through to where this is open, which is something I'm going to be doing when I remove the manifold this time around. And another interesting thing, this is designed for the supercharged manifolds, which have a little more space in this region here. I've actually had to modify a lot of mine so that they sit correctly. So I'm going to pull this one out because I did the hard legwork first with the hex wrench. So you see how I've actually rounded this corner off right here. Got my little front driver mark here. So I had to machine these down to make space for the more rounded corner that it sits in here. So again, if you're dealing with a supercharged manifold, this is just a straight shot across. You don't have some of this extra nonsense that the tri-power manifolds have. They're a little more complicated design. So I just had to kind of adapt and overcome because I was a little late to the game realizing it when I put the manifold on and, suddenly the bolts don't fit. So this wasn't quite perfect as well. So I'm going to be slotting those bolts and doing a little bit more machine work just to eat away at this corner a little bit more. Same on a couple of the other ones. And once that's done, it should really make sure that it seals nicely and prevent some of this oil creeping up the bolts that you're seeing, which is kind of muddying up my intake manifold. All right, so we're now going to pull the distributor. In the previous video, you saw that I disconnected the signal feed from that already. This is kind of like a later, almost like MSD style, electronic ignition style distributor, but it's a smaller form factor, so it fits this car. James has already removed the rotor, which is what I was talking about just a moment ago, just to make the extra clearance. And you'll see as I start to lift this up, how tight the clearance is, thanks to this really just never being designed for quite such a large distributor. And this one having the billet base and everything, you know, it just takes up that extra space. So I'm gonna lift this guy out now. There we go. And as you can see, if you haven't pulled a distributor before, watch this. The gear down at the bottom is actually helical. So this is going to rotate as we lift up, as it disengages. So just keep that in mind. If you're pulling straight up and it doesn't seem like it's moving, just make sure that you're kind of helping it along. All right, there we go. And just clears. And there we have it. Distributor is out. And for those of you that are curious, this was actually a pretty cheap unit. It's kind of like not a name brand one. I want to say it was like Assault Racing or something. Frankly, not the greatest reviews, but it's done me quite well, and I think it cost me about 80 bucks. It looks nice, and it's run extremely well, so, you know, my experience with it's been great. All right, so we are now working on actually removing the intake manifold itself. If you haven't installed one of these, you may not know this, but when you put the gaskets on, you're also going to use a little bit of sealant to actually seal along the front here, and then also around some of the coolant passages and things like that. So don't be surprised if when you take the bolts out, it feels like it's glued on there, because it is. My method has always been, oftentimes you'll have a little overhang up front here, and if you have a rubber mallet or a block of wood and just a you know, small hammer, like an average 1 pound hammer, and you can just kind of tuck it under an edge here. You want something softer than the manifold itself, so you're not going to damage the manifold. And just lightly tapping, just to try and kind of break the connection between the sealant and the block and the gaskets. And just a little bit of work like that, and you'll tend to be able to actually free the manifold up to where you can lift it off. So definitely go careful, because almost all of these are going to be aluminum, and you definitely don't want to mess up your manifold. I would just say slow and steady, take it easy, and you know, just work your way up and get, you know, don't start too aggressive, right? Start easy and then get a little more aggressive as needed, and just do your best not to damage the manifold on the way out. There it is. We got it? Yeah. Nice. Well done. I made a space on the workbench. We got it off. All right, so we got the intake manifold off relatively trouble-free. So now the next step is going to be actually cleaning the gaskets and the sealant out of the kind of valley here. So these are the old Felpro gaskets that I used. They worked extremely well. And actually an interesting thing, you can see right here, I hadn't quite sealed it perfectly. So you see this little kind of milkshake, you know, chocolatey colored stuff here. That's actually a little bit of coolant and oil mixing. So I never noticed it when actually running the car, but it's a great thing to see that, you know, okay, that's something I need to work on. As I seal these, I need to maybe go a little heavier with some of the gasket maker to make sure that I actually seal that properly. So when you're pulling stuff like this, don't be afraid to, you know, kind of be scientific about looking at, you know, how it was running. Look at each of the openings here and see, okay, you know, got some carbon buildup here. You know, I went a little too heavy on the gasket maker here, so I have these little overhangs. And learn from that, and then the next time you put it back on, you can adjust how you're doing it and make it that little bit better each time. So probably gonna wrap the video here, I think. You know, we got nice and deep into the engine on this one. I've got some work to do on the intake manifold itself, which I'll probably make a separate video on. But for the time being, this is where we need it to be. So big breakthrough. Appreciate you guys following along, and we'll catch you on the next video.